nice. I actually saw him. I was here in the '70s, and I went to the club. And,
what year?
Mid '70s.
Right.
You know, mid to late '70s.
Right.
Belzer was the MC. Belzer was like the hottest guy. He was the guy who would introduce the acts, who would ad lib, who would talk to the audience. He was really amazing, and he also helped discover a lot of the comedians who, stand-up comedians who
went on to make a lot more money than I did.
That's true.
Yeah.
But tell me what that scene, you know, just give me a little, you know, for people who weren't there, what was that scene like? Was it as glamorous and as exciting as it seems to be today?
Well, it's one of the, I must say, it's one of the, I was fortunate to be in a situation that when it was happening, I knew it was special.
Yeah.
Because Catch a Rising Star became like the Studio 54 of comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And by that I mean on any given night, any major celebrity or group of celebrities would be in the audience to see the show. Anyone from Pat Chayefsky to Sean Connery to Eric Idle to Tony Bennett, Pesci, De Niro,
right.
Chris Wall. I mean, just everybody came in there. And the thing was that there was a normalcy to it and there was a glamour to it. The club had this personality that was clearly the offshoot of Rick Newman, who was the owner of the club, but his personality infused it. And it was a very gracious, kind of welcoming street guy who had a very, he was a great, what we would call in France, a great tavern owner, the guy you want to come and see, but it was show business. And in those days, it was comic singer in the early days, and then it eventually just became comedians. And every major comedian came through there, either on stage or in the audience. A lot of nights, Saturday Night Live, whoever was hosting that week would come in and try a bit. It was astounding. I mean,
when you became the MC there,
yes.
And you were the guy who, you know, you would kind of run the show. You would ad-lib, you would do a little material, you would introduce people. Was that you seem to kind of set the style. Now you go to any comedy club today and there's an MC, and they're basically like doing Richard Belzer. Was there somebody who was doing that before you? I mean, did you copy somebody, or did you kind of invent that?
Well, I don't think I invented it. I certainly, at the risk of being allowed to say, I kind of maybe perfected it. But my inspiration, is that immodest? So be it. My inspiration growing up were Jackie Leonard, Groucho Marx. It was always people that, you know, were funny and dark, and you know, like everybody had an uncle like Groucho Marx, only he was a genius, you know, as Woody Allen once said. Yeah. I was always the person that said what was in the pre-conscious of everyone. So here I had a stage, and I could talk to people in the audience and improvise, because I didn't have any material, as a lot of other comedians would gladly tell you. I mean, I had some material, yes. But my thing was talking to the audience or improvising off that day's news or some object that I found, because to me there's nothing funnier than, for an audience, than to see comedy created in the moment. That thing may never be funny again, or it may have a huge shelf life, but that audience and I both know that could not have happened unless everyone was together at that particular moment.
Right.
You know, it's like physics, and to me that is better than, you know, like, it's better than a written joke killing. I would rather improvise and have the whole audience, you know, be enraptured by laughter and the spontaneity.
Well, the joke at the time was if you were a comedian waiting to go on and Belzer was introducing you, you had to be ready at any time. He could start to introduce you, and then he'd get distracted by somebody in the audience. He'd ad-lib for 10 minutes, and you'd be standing there waiting. There's
the most famous case. People, the other comics would you know, say, oh, it took him 5 minutes to bring me on. It took me one night. It took me an hour and 45 minutes to bring on. Remember Maurice? I kept introducing this one guy. And then something would end an hour and 45 minutes, the longest introduction in the history of show business.
Rick Newman, the owner of Catch a Rising Star, Rick, is in the audience tonight, so he can answer any questions, things that you don't remember.
Ooh. Which there are legion, I'm sure.
Let's go back a little bit. You talked about Jackie Leonard, Groucho Marx. The person that I started out talking about that seemed to me the godfather of this whole generation of comics was Lenny Bruce. Was Lenny Bruce an influence on you, or?
Lenny Bruce was an influence in the sense that he didn't really tell jokes, and like Richard Pryor or Dick Gregory, or people that could take social or psychological or sexual situations and discuss them to the point where the audience is maybe getting a little uncomfortable, and then there's an explosive laugh line. Mm-hmm. That to me is those are the true artists, the people that could talk conversationally or do characters, but not tell boom 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 jokes. Right. And that's what those people inspired in me.
Right.
So yeah, Lenny Bruce was an inspiration, but stylistically, I think it's a recipe of different people.
Mm-hmm. How did you talk about starting it just the first time you tried to do stand-up
Yes.
comedy? Was it successful, or did you really have to struggle?
I was terrified. I was literally terrified. It is the scariest thing in the world, and I'd have to have a martini or two and walk around the block. And I remember auditioning at Catch. I think it was 1972 or 3. You got a number, and you stood on line, and you went in and you did your 5 minutes, and I just remember being really scared.
What did you do? You remember what you did? What was your first?
I think I did Rod Steiger as a weatherman. It's going to be cloudy, 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 cloudy. The black newscaster. This is Rufus X with the news in your goddamn face.
Okay.
Characters, impressions.
When did the Mick Jagger come along?
Mick Jagger. Well, I remember being on Quaaludes and crawling up a piano like a crab once to catch. So that had to be the no. Mick Jagger. When did I start doing Jagger? Well, very early on in the 70s, I guess, because I remember we had a piano player at Catch, and I would do play around with the music. 70s.
One of the people that was hanging out at the club was Pat Benatar.
Mm-hmm.
She told me that every comedian wanted to be a rock star, and every rock star wanted to be a comedian. And you might be an example of that, because you did a lot of rock. Yeah, no, that's true. A lot of comedians, like Richard Lewis hangs out with Ronnie Wood, and Sam Kinison hung out with, the metal bands, and there's this affinity that we have for each other, and some of those guys would, love to do what we do, right.
So it's
But did you really, if you had another life, would you want to be a rock star?
No.
No. Okay.
Because, well, I can't say why.
But you still do, even in your act recently at Town Hall, you put a lot of music in your act.
I do a lot of music because I can get away with it, and I have a great band. And when I grew up, Jimmy Durante, Martin and Lewis, Danny Kaye, Joe E. Lewis, Jackie Leonard had a piano player. These were full-service entertainers, particularly Martin Lewis, and people that would sing, dance to impressions, fall down. That's where I come from. That's how old I am. So, I've always wanted to do all that stuff. I mean, I think I'm pretty good at some of it, and maybe a little better than most at some other aspects of it. But it's just this old-fashioned thing of doing whatever I can. Maybe it's desperation. Love me, laugh at me, tap your toes at me.
You're citing a lot of the older comics that I didn't expect you. Your comedy became very edgy. Mm-hmm. You pushed the envelope. You were dirty, quote unquote dirty in those days. Were you trying to be? I mean, that's why it felt to me like you were more in the Lenny Bruce kind of mold. Was that true? Or how did that just come about? That you
I know that nothing was by design. I knew I wanted to do what I was doing, but I knew that my main influences were kind of Lenny and Pryor, Dick Gregory, those kind of Mort Saul. Mm-hmm. But I came from this older tradition too of the full service entertainers that weren't edgy but were anarchic and were old-fashioned and just did. So I had this kind of, I don't know, not schizophrenic, but I had all these things there. Yeah. But I think my basic personality, ever since I can remember was getting in trouble, questioning reality, getting thrown out of every school I ever went to, literally, including Hebrew school. Yeshiva, they
What
threw
did you
me
do?
out. Well, they said, you know, get out of here, you know, pray to Minnie Pearl, eat bacon, you're not a Jew anymore. And just, they had it with me. And so that was in my nature. So my basic nature married to this kind of old-fashioned show business tradition has created the monster you see before you.
Yes. How about the guys that came after Lenny and that I thought were key figures, like
George.
well, you mentioned George Carlin, Richard Pryor, and Robert Klein.
Yeah.
Was Carlin an influence?
Well, you know, Carlin was kind of, you know, Mark Twain. He was, he brought this reverence for language to the form, and he was so prolific and so challenging. Like when we did the Mark Twain Prize recently, I was standing backstage with Jon Stewart, and they were showing a clip of one of George's bits, and John turned to me and said, "Well, that's his 14th greatest bit."
Yeah.
Like he had so many.
Yeah. That was
he
a
had
great
28
show.
albums. You know, I did one album, and I'm 73 years old. You know what I'm saying? I mean, just not just how prolific it was, but how great it was, how dedicated it was, how diligent, and how he questioned everything from, you know, the basic nature of humanity to politics to religion. And, you know, George was George is like Charlie Parker. It's like anybody who plays a saxophone, whether they ever heard Charlie Parker or not, it was influenced by Charlie Parker. I think anybody that has any semblance of intelligence doing stand-up today is influenced by George Carlin.